She kept quiet for 15 years. The king's mistress gave birth to his brother's child. The clerk broke the wax seal and opened the notebook she had given to the guards an hour before her execution. He began to read aloud, and his words cut through everyone standing in the hall. The boy is not the king's son. He is his brother's son. The clerk faltered, his lips trembling. The commander of the guards cursed and snatched the notebook from him. He ran to the doors, but the advisers were already rushing towards him. One of them slammed his palm on the table and shouted, "Close the gates! Don't let anyone out!" Someone's mother moaned in the corridor, and the guards called to each other in the palace courtyard below. She sat in the cell under the stairs and listened to the noise like a dull rumble. She knew that now it was all over. 15 years ago she had been brought here late at night. The carriage wheels had leather straps, and she remembered only the incessant clatter. She climbed out herself, without waiting for the footman's hand. "Marguerite, of the House of Roche," announced the chamberlain, bowing. She looked around. No servants with trunks, no relatives. "The king wants you to live quietly," said the chamberlain. "Your rooms are in the north wing. 3 people know about you." He spoke evenly, without looking up. "I understand," she said. The chamberlain looked at the keys. "Understanding is one thing. Keeping quiet is another. Do you agree?" She nodded. He signaled to a young maid. "This is Agnes. She is deaf. She will be with you." Margarita asked, "Why me?" The chamberlain shrugged. "The king does not explain such things." She remembered their first meeting clearly. He came at night, without a cloak, wearing a simple shirt. His face was tired, with bruises under his eyes. He sat down on a low bench by the window and said, "It's quiet here." She stood opposite him, not knowing where to put her hands. "I saw you at Count Lore's tournament," he said, without looking up. "You looked at me as if I were ordinary." She replied, "I was looking at the blood on your fingers. You took off your glove, and your finger was broken." He smiled. "I see." He came closer and asked, "Are you willing to live as I say? Without courtiers, without celebrations, without rumors?" She replied quietly, "I am." He took her by the wrist, his palm warm and dry. "I feel calm with you. I ask that you not speak to me as you would to a king." She nodded. He lifted her face by the chin and said, "Then let's begin." Her life became simple and secluded. A jug of water in the morning, bread, knitting. Agnes lit the fireplace, brought milk, folded clean sheets. In the afternoon, the old doctor came, checked her pulse, and pretended he had come because of a headache. At night, the king sometimes stayed until dawn and fell asleep, his head, and looked into her face. "He is comfortable with you here. You are comfortable with you here. But what about me?" She replied quietly, "You are the king's brother." He smiled without joy. "That's all I know how to do." He reached for her and suddenly kissed her. She recoiled and said, "No." He stepped back as if he had been struck. "I'm sorry," he said. He stood up, adjusted his sleeves, and left. He didn't come for 2 days. Then he appeared and brought a sack of flour. He put it by the stove and lowered his eyes. "I wasn't myself then." She nodded. "It's my fault," she said suddenly. "I shouldn't have listened to you when you complained. I shouldn't have answered back." He looked up at her. "Everyone is to blame here," he said. "The blame is laid out on the table like knives. Everyone took theirs." He came closer. "Do you want me to leave forever?" She looked at his hand, which was trembling. "No," she said. "Come in the afternoon." That day, he stayed anyway. Agnes fell asleep against the wall, her head resting on a basket. He stood by the window. She put the mugs on the table. "They say you're putting a curse on him." He suddenly repeated someone else's words. "That's how they explain everything they don't understand." She replied, "It's simpler than that. I don't ask him questions." He moved closer to her but didn't touch her. "What about me?" he asked. "Do you ask me questions?" She didn't have time to answer. He hugged her. She stood motionless for a few moments, then touched his shoulder and said, "Stop." He pulled away, but it was too late. He reached out again, and this time she didn't push him away. The next morning she washed her face for a long time until her skin turned red. She didn't cry. She looked at herself in the copper basin. The same face, the same eyes. Agnes barely noticed anything and set the table faster than usual. Her brother came the next day and didn't come in. He stood in the hallway and said, "No words, I won't talk." She nodded from behind the door. Me neither. They parted like people who had seen more than they should have, and now feared an extra glance. The king returned a month later. He entered the room, took off his gloves, looked at her, and smiled. "You've lost weight." She replied, "I've been walking around the room a lot." He hugged her and didn't let go for a long time. That same night he said, "I want a child." She recoiled. "How will you arrange that?" He smiled. "We'll have to be careful, but I want a son that no one will see until the time is right." She turned away and said, "That's a risk." He was surprised. "Are you afraid?" She answered honestly, "I'm not afraid for myself." He stroked her hair and whispered, "I'll take care of everything." She closed her eyes and stopped resisting. A week later she felt that everything had changed. The old midwife was the first to guess. She came on business, counted the days, and said nothing, only began to visit more often. The king was pleased. He loved to talk about the future. "I will build him a house next to the kennels," he said. "He will run with the boys. No one will know whose blood he has. I'll tell you when the time comes." She listened and said nothing. Her brother rarely visited. He didn't look her in the eye. Once he asked, "Does he know?" She nodded. "And what does he say?" She repeated, "He says he'll take care of everything." Her brother grimaced. "He always says that." The labor began at night. The midwife arrived quickly, as if she had been waiting at the door. Agnes held a bowl of water and tore the sheets. Margarita did not scream. She clenched her teeth. At dawn, the baby cried out. The midwife picked him up and said, "It's a boy." Agnes burst into tears. Margarita lay there and stared at the ceiling. She knew that now there was little time left. The king entered without knocking. He was pale and happy. "A son," he said. He took the boy in his arms and laughed. Then he leaned toward Margarita. "You are clever." She looked at the midwife. She lowered her head. Her brother did not come that day. She sent Agnes to him with a note. "Don't come, I beg you." He sent a short reply. "I obey." From the first days, the child was hidden in a small house near the kennels, as the king had promised. He himself went there in the mornings, brought milk, sat on a bench, and rocked the cradle. He spoke to the boy, as he spoke to no one else. Funny words, short songs. "You will be brave," he said. The boy reached out to him with his hands. Margarita came more often at night. She fed him, tucked him in, and in the silence, she could hear him swallow. She did not cry. She looked at the child's face and saw in it both the king and the other man. It was unimaginable, but it was true. She wore a red woolen thread on her wrist. The midwife insisted on it. "So that no one will jinx him," said the old woman. Margarita took off the thread a week later and burned it in the hearth. Her brother began to appear from time to time near the kennels. He did not go inside. He approached the window where a coarse curtain hung and listened. Once the boy saw him and stretched out his hand. The Duke raised his hand as if to wave, and then immediately lowered it. He stood motionless until the boy stopped looking for him. Then he left. Later, when they met in the hallway, he said quietly to her, "He has ears like mine." She replied, "Don't say that anymore." He nodded. Years passed. The boy grew up fast, thin, stubborn. His name was Thibaut. That was decided by the midwife and the king. "It's a simple name," explained the king. Thibaut loved to run after dogs, play with belts, and shout at geese. Marguerite taught him letters at night when everyone was asleep. He picked things up quickly, but couldn't stand sitting still. "Sit," she would say. He would pout, "Right now." The king would rush in, toss him up in the air, and laugh. "Come on, show us the letter." Thibaut would show it and be proud. In moments like these, Marguerite would forget everything else. Then, when the door closed, the heaviness would return. Rumors inevitably spread. First in whispers among the maids at the well. Then the cook said loudly, "The king hid this child." The groom replied, "So what? He's a human being." The captain of the guard scolded them and promised to whip them. The Duke remained silent. Once he said to Margarita, "Rumors are like a vat of fermenting wine. If you leave them alone, they will ferment." She suggested, "Should we take him away?" The Duke turned his head sharply. "Where?" She spread her arms. "To a monastery." He slammed his fist on the doorframe. "No." She backed away. He leaned against the wall and said calmly, "Don't send him to a monastery. He needs to run and laugh, that's all he has." She agreed. She knew he was right. The king was getting old. The crease on his forehead deepened. It was hard to wake him up, and he was often silent at Margaret's table. She felt life outside her rooms heating up. The court was arguing about who would be the heir. The king had a legitimate daughter from his marriage, but she lived far away. Her husband was from the north, and she rarely visited. The advisers nudged each other and threw out the names of young cousins. The king listened and did not express an opinion. Returning to Margarita, he would linger each time on her face and the empty cradle by the wall. "He is already 10, he would say. "Soon it will be time to teach him to wield a sword." She replied, "He likes belts, but swords are heavy." The king smiled. "We'll make a lighter one." The Duke was on his guard during those years. He did not allow himself to smile in front of people or glance at the kennels. But once, when Thibaut was 12, he stopped the boy at the gate. "What is your name?" he asked. "Thibaut," replied the boy, without looking away. "How old are you?" 12. The Duke nodded. "Do you fight with the other boys?" "Sometimes." The Duke leaned forward and unexpectedly, easily grabbed the boy by the wrist. "Hit me," he suggested, showing him how to position his foot. Thibaut struck awkwardly. The Duke corrected him. "That's it. Again." On the third try, the boy succeeded. The Duke let him go and said almost cheerfully, "Come in the evening when they feed the dogs. I'll show you a couple of moves." Marguerite heard about this from the boy. She pressed her lips together. "Don't brag about it," she said, "and don't tell anyone who taught you." He was surprised. "Why?" she replied, because that's the way it should be. Soon everything came to an end. The king fell seriously ill and lay in his chamber. The doctors whispered in the corner. Margarita was not allowed to see him. "That's the order," said the chamberlain evenly. The duke did not leave the palace for days. Advisers and confessors gathered in the hall. The king's daughters sent a letter promising to come, but they missed the deadline. During those days, the guards began to patrol the kennels more often. Margarita sat by the window and ironed Thibault's shirts, even though he no longer wore such simple clothes. The king died early in the morning. The city was silent that day. The gates were closed. The bell in the tower rang for a long time. Marguerite stood hugging Agnes. Thibault sat on a bench and looked at his hands. He said nothing, because he did not fully understand what was happening. 2 days later, the council announced that the Duke of Eddelin had been appointed temporary ruler. His voice sounded hollow. He came out to the people in a simple black cloak, without any decorations. On the 3rd day, he ordered Margarita to be brought secretly to the south wing. He entered the room and closed the door behind him. "He is dead," he said. She nodded. "I know." The duke came close and asked, "You have been silent for 15 years. Will you remain silent?" She replied, "Yes." He looked at her strangely, as if he wanted to say, "Thank you," but couldn't. "All right," he said. "Then I'll do the rest." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Don't go to the coffin. Don't ask. They won't let you in, and it will torment you." She sat down and nodded. After the funeral, arguments began. Some advisers spoke of the daughter. Others whispered about the boy from the kennel. Still others shouted, "What are you talking about? That's illegal." The people of the city were in an uproar. Every butler whispered with every merchant about who had the right blood in their veins. The Duke made a quick decision. He ordered Thibault to be taken to a nearby hunting lodge that night. Marguerite went with him. He sat opposite the boy in the carriage. "Listen to me," he said. "It's quiet there. You'll stay there while I sort everything out?" Thibault asked. "Who are you?" The Duke smiled slightly. "Your uncle." The boy nodded. "Where's my mother?" "Nearby." Marguerite took his hand. He clutched it tightly. The Duke did not keep his word for long. A detachment of northerners sent by the royal daughter's husband arrived in the capital. They stopped at the gates and demanded that her rights be recognized. The council began to stall for time. At the same time, someone, probably from the kitchen, sold the story about the boy to a priest from the lower temple. The priest came to the Duke and said, "The rumors must be quelled. Let me see the child." The Duke replied harshly, "No." The priest pursed his lips. "Then I will bring the matter before the chapter." "Bring it," said the Duke. He understood that this door would open without him. Margarita was arrested a week later. It was not the Duke who did it, but the council. "You are accused of debauchery and slander against the throne," the judge said coldly. She stood in a bright hall, her hands bound with straps. "I remained silent," she replied. The judge said, "Silence is also an action." She was led down a damp staircase with chipped steps. Agnes tried to rush to her, but was pushed away. Margarita turned around and just managed to shout, "Watch him!" Agnes nodded, pressing her palms to her chest. She was given 3 days before the trial to think. The cell was empty. She sat by the wall with her eyes closed, remembering every night, every smile, every little thing. On the 2nd day, the Duke was brought in. He stood by the bars, not approaching. The guards moved to the end of the corridor. "I tried," he said simply. "I know," she replied. He lowered his head. "They demand proof to get rid of the boy. And they like the word proof. They'll like any dirt." She looked up at him. "What do you like?" He flinched. "Me? I like it when he laughs, and when he asks why, and when you say, 'Of course,' instead of 'yes.'" They were silent. He said, "If you tell the truth, they'll kill you and leave him alive, but not as king. If you remain silent, they will kill him. They are already looking that way." She closed her eyes. "Don't you dare say that," she whispered. He glanced back at the guards and approached her again. "Choose," she asked. "And you? What would you choose?" He replied, just as quietly, "I will choose for him to live." She held his gaze and nodded. "Then let's do that." On the night of the third day, she asked the clerk for paper and ink. The clerk was young, with narrow shoulders, and an anxious look in his eyes. He said, "What do you need it for?" She replied, "I will do what you don't have the courage to do." He brought her sheets of paper and a candle. She wrote for a long time, forming neat letters. She wrote names, dates, and repeated simple words. No hiding, no tenderness. "The boy is not the king's son. He is his brother's son," she wrote in the first lines. She went on to describe the day when the Duke entered at night and what happened next. She did not make excuses. She did not cry. She wrote in such a way that even a stupid guard would understand what had happened. At the end, she added, "I kept silent, because I was afraid. Now I cannot remain silent. If my voice saves him, let it save him." In the morning, the clerk opened the notebook and read the first words in front of witnesses. Then the excitement began. The Duke was summoned immediately. He entered the hall, took the notebook, and did not argue. "Give me an hour," he said. They did not give him one. "Immediately," repeated the judge. The Duke looked at the clerk, at the guards, at the two advisers whose eyes were shining. "All right," he said. "Then listen to me. Don't touch the boy. He knew nothing. He is not to blame." One of the advisers sneered. "He is a lie incarnate." The Duke leaned forward. "One more word, and I'll drag you out into the courtyard." The man backed away. The trial was held quickly. The priests read prayers. The judges asked questions, the answers to which were already on paper. Margarita stood straight and looked ahead. She was given the right to say the last word. She said, "I did what you call a sin. Yes. But what you want to do is worse. You want to kill a child for being born. You cannot do that." The judge leaned back in his chair. "No one will kill the child." She understood that he was telling the truth, but it brought her no relief. The judge raised his hand. "The sentence is death by beheading, to be carried out tomorrow." That night, the Duke came again. He brought the keys and whispered, "Let's go." She shook her head. "No." He grabbed the bars so hard that his knuckles turned white. "I'll take you away. We'll leave through the courtyards. I have everything ready." She replied stubbornly, "Then why did I write?" He closed his eyes. "To save the child. We saved him. He's on his way with Agnes. They're going to the sea." She exhaled. "So you've made your choice." He opened his eyes. "I chose what you told me to." She smiled slightly. "Then go." He suddenly asked, "Do you hate me?" She answered honestly, "I love him. As for you, I don't know. I see you as a knife on the table. It's necessary. It cuts. It leaves marks." He stepped back. "I understand." He turned and left without looking back. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. At dawn, she was led out into the courtyard. People stood close together, but there was a strange silence. The executioner was short, with broad palms. He did not raise his eyes. The priest whispered something nearby, but she did not listen to him. She raised her head and saw the clerk in the crowd. He was holding a notebook to his chest and trembling. "Make sure it is read where it needs to be read," she said. He nodded. 2 advisors were standing nearby, the very same ones. One whispered to the other, "Now everything is easier." She turned her head toward them and said clearly, "It is easier for you, but only for now." They looked away. They blindfolded her. She asked, "Don't." The executioner stopped and untied the knot. "As you wish." She looked boldly at the platform, at the edge of the block. She asked, "Give me a handkerchief." The executioner handed her a clean cloth. She tied her hair at the back of her head. "I'm ready." The executioner nodded. She laid her neck on the edge. For a second she saw the color of the wood and the scratches from previous blows. She heard someone whisper her name. She did not turn her head. He raised the axe. The blow was swift. The crowd did not disperse immediately. People stood as if waiting for more words. The priest covered her face with a cloth. The clerk stood still and did not move. The Duke was not in the square. At that moment he was rushing to the south gate to make sure that Agnes and the boy had left. The groom he trusted gave him a sign. The Duke got into the saddle and said, "Go." He rode back to the castle, without guards and without plans for the day. After the execution, the council began to meet almost every day. The paper she had written was read 3 times, by the councillors, the priests, and the nearest landowners. Some felt better, some felt worse. The king's daughter sent a messenger. "I am coming." The Duke took the seals in his hands and sent out letters. "The crown passes by right of marriage." He signed evenly, without pausing. At night, he would come to the empty room where Margarita had lived for 15 years and sit on the bench by the window. He looked at the box on the table. He had opened it only once. Inside lay a thin chain without a stone. He put it back and closed the lid. "I don't touch what doesn't belong to me," he said to himself. Thibaut rode south with Agnes and said nothing. He did not ask why they were going. Agnes held him close when the cart bounced over a bump. She took out a linen bag of dry bread, broke off pieces, and put them in his palm. "Eat," she said. He chewed slowly. On the first evening, when they stopped at an inn, he asked, "Where's Mom?" Agnes didn't know how to speak clearly, but now she had to. She pointed upward, then pressed her palm to her chest and closed her eyes. He understood, but not right away. He sat down by the fire and stared into the flames. The stable boy, the reliable one, approached him. "Your mother was brave," he said. Thibaut nodded. "Your uncle ordered us to take care of you." Thibaut suddenly looked up. "Who is he?" The groom replied simply, "Your father." Agnes gasped and covered the groom's mouth with her hand. The groom gently pushed her away. "Let him know." Thibaut sat motionless for a long time. Then he asked, "Why did everyone keep quiet?" The stableman replied, "So that you could live." The boy did not cry. He simply lay down on the straw and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then he fell asleep. Meanwhile, in the capital, preparations were underway for the coronation of the daughter. The Duke stood nearby, as was expected. People whispered, "He gave up the crown and saved his life." He did not react. He did what he thought was necessary and did not explain. On the 5th day after the execution, he ordered 2 advisers, the very ones who had smiled on the scaffold, to be imprisoned. For inciting the murder of a child, he said. The child is alive, they objected. He replied, exactly. But I heard your words. They were held for 3 weeks, then released, but without their positions. The Duke did not look them in the eye when he signed the decrees removing them from office. Agnes and Thibaut reached a small port in the south. There, an old fisherman whom the Duke had once helped was waiting for them. The fisherman silently took the boy by the shoulder and led him to a small house by the pier. You will live here, he said. Agnes nodded and immediately began wiping the table with a damp cloth. Thibaut went ashore and crouched down. He watched the men pulling in their nets, the boys running with ropes, the dog barking at a lame cat. He did not think about titles and blood. He thought about where to get a knife to cut the rope and how to secure the stick so it wouldn't fall out of his hands. That was his strength. A year later, a letter arrived from the Duke. The same stable boy brought it. The letter contained no unnecessary words. Live. Learn to read and count. I will hire a teacher. I will come soon. Thibaut looked at Agnes. She nodded. He will come, she said in her strange voice. The boy put the letter in the chest and continued to repair the net. He already knew how to tie knots better than any adult. The fisherman laughed and patted him on the back. You're fast. Thibaut was silent and nodded. At night he woke up and listened to the silence. He didn't like silence, but now it was his. He thought about his mother in short bursts. She said no, flashed through his mind. She said yes. He didn't try to connect these 2 pieces into one truth, because he understood that they were both true. The Duke did not arrive. 6 months later, news came that a new dispute had begun in the capital. The Northerners wanted more. The Queen demanded closer ties between the council and her people. The Duke defended himself as best he could. He was neither soft nor cruel. He was stubborn. The young clerk wrote his papers, and once at the end of a long list of orders, added in his uneven handwriting, I still keep her notebook. The Duke replied with one word, keep it. Years passed. Thibaut grew tall. He learned to wield a sword, though he did not like it. The teacher sent by the Duke taught him Latin words, arithmetic, and writing. Thibaut wrote neatly, like his mother. Once he sat down at the table and copied by hand the very phrase that Agnes had repeated to him, showing her fingers. The boy is not the king's son. He is his brother's son. He stared at these words for a long time, then crumpled the sheet of paper and burned it. He realized that this phrase was neither a sword nor a shield. It was both a key and a lock. He decided that he would live as if he had no keys. The Queen in the capital aged faster than expected. New faces joined the council, and the Duke no longer played first fiddle. He stopped coming to that empty room at night. He began to understand that all his decisions now did not cut the ropes, but tighten the knots. The clerk brought the papers. The Duke signed them. At the end of each year, he sent money and a short note to the south. Study. One winter day, he received a reply written in firm, mature handwriting. I am studying. I am alive. Thank you. Thibaut. The Duke read it, put the letter on the table, and sat motionless for a long time. Then he called the clerk. Put off business for today. 2 more years passed. At the end of the 3rd year, news came that the fishermen had been swept away while fishing, and the little house by the pier was now empty. Agnes couldn't manage on her own. The Duke sent 2 men to take them to a nearby estate, where it was safer. Thibaut did not argue. He got into the cart and went. The new estate had a school for sailors' boys, small and without city pretensions. He was given a bed and a desk. He began to learn faster than the others and became withdrawn. He rarely smiled. He answered briefly. The teacher, a strict man, once said to him, "Your birth pain will never go away if you feed it with silence." Thibaut replied, "I am not silent. I am working." The teacher did not argue. 10 years after the execution, the situation in the capital changed. The queen died after an illness, leaving no sons. The council chose a new regent for her nephew. It was Duke Edelin again. He accepted it as a heavy burden and carried it. The first thing he did was to order the isolated room in the north wing to be opened. The room was aired out and people were let in. Everything was washed and shaken out. The Duke was the last to enter. He took the box from the table and opened it again. The chain lay there as before. He put it on his hand and wrapped it around his wrist like a bracelet. He said, "Let's go." The clerk standing nearby asked, "Where to?" The Duke replied, "To the south." He left that night, taking 1 guard with him. The meeting did not take place. They missed each other on the road. The Duke's men, whom he had sent ahead, hastened the caravan from Thibaut, fearing an attack by robbers. The Duke rode toward them, changing horses 3 times, but still did not make it in time. When he reached the estate, he was told, "They have gone to the sea." He gritted his teeth. He rode on. At the 3rd outpost, he was stopped. "Storm. The road has been washed away." He dismounted, sat down on the rocks, and for the first time in many years allowed himself to lower his head into his hands. He sat there for a short time, then got up, ordered a U-turn, and rode back. On the same day, a clerk was found in the capital with his throat cut. Someone had decided that the notebook had been lying in the box for too long. The guards found the box empty. The Duke returned and sat until nightfall, holding the chain in his hand. "Who?" he asked. The commander of the guards remained silent. "Who?" the Duke repeated. No one answered. He looked at the empty box and said, "The notebook is no longer needed." He understood that the paper had lived its life. It had saved 1 man and killed another. He ordered the clerk to be buried with honors. He walked down the corridor, and the sound of his heels echoed like heartbeats in an empty hall. 15 years after that morning when the clerk read aloud the first words, the port where Thibaut lived woke up as usual. The men trudged to the boats. Agnes coughed and broke out in a sweat. She had a fever. Thibaut sat by her bed, changing wet rags and giving her water to drink. She looked at him with cloudy eyes and tried to say something. He leaned over. She whispered, stumbling over her words. She was standing upright. He nodded. "I remember." He held her hand until her pulse disappeared. He sat down on the floor and buried his face in his hands. Then he got up, covered her with a clean sheet, and went out to the fishermen. "We need a priest," he said. The men got up and went to do what was necessary. That same evening, a black carriage without a coat of arms entered the port. A man in a cloak, already gray-haired, got out of it. Thibaut did not recognize him at first. Only when he came closer did he see the eyes that had once looked at him through the curtain of the kennel window. The Duke took off his hood. "I'm late," he said, looking at the door of the house. "Yes," replied Thibaut. They stood there, not knowing what to say. The Duke held out his hand. "I am your father." Thibaut did not take his hand. He asked, "Have you come to take me away?" The Duke shook his head. "I have come to see you." Thibault nodded slowly. "Look." He took a step back. The Duke looked at him as if he were just a man. His shoulders, his hands, his face. "You look like me," he said quietly. "And like her." Thibault replied, "I look like the one who raised me." The Duke nodded. "Like Agnes." The silence became heavy. Thibault made a move as if to leave, but stopped. "Did you read her notebook?" he asked. The Duke looked away. "No, I knew what was in it." "I couldn't." Thibault thought for a moment and said, "I couldn't either." They stood side by side, and there was more in that standing than in any words. The Duke stayed in the port for 3 days. He didn't tell anyone who he was. He helped Thibault bury Agnes. He walked behind the coffin, holding his hat in his hands. People looked at him and saw a stranger with a tired face. After the funeral, he took a box from under his cloak, the very same one. He opened it and took out the chain. "It's hers," he said. Thibault did not take it. "Keep it." The Duke nodded and put the chain away again. He sat down on a bench by the wall and spoke, looking at the floor. "I don't know what to say to you. I only know that you lived because she told the truth, and she died because I once entered someone else's room." He raised his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm asking you to go on living." Thibault replied, "I am living." The Duke smiled wearily. "Then maybe I did at least that right." On the 4th day, he left. There were no hugs or promises. He simply said, "If you need me, come to the capital. You'll find me easily. I'm still there." Thibault nodded. "I'll find you if I need to." They shook hands without further words. The Duke got into his carriage and drove away. Thibault stood and watched the wheels roll over the stone. He did not cry. A year later, there was another commotion in the capital. The new regent, a man from the north, wanted to review old cases. He took her trial records from the archives. He wanted to reopen the discussion about the boy from the kennel. The Duke sat in the meeting and remained silent for a long time. When the new regent finished speaking, he stood up. "I will close this matter today, and forever," he said. He took a thin chain from his sleeve and placed it on the table. "This is all I have left of that woman. It is enough to keep me silent. The rest is not yours." The new regent tried to object. The Duke looked at him in such a way that he fell silent. "You are a tired man," said the regent. The Duke replied, "I am a man with a memory." The council fell silent. The papers were cleared away. The matter was closed on paper. It still lived on in people's minds, but more quietly. Meanwhile, Thibault returned to his nets. He worked as he had worked before. Sometimes strangers approached him and asked his name. He replied, "Thibault," and that was all. He added nothing else. Once, a young man with good hands approached the pier and asked if they needed workers. Thibault asked, "What's your name?" The young man replied, "Paul." Thibault nodded. "Will you cut the rope?" "I will." "Then take the knife." The young man took the knife and began. A week later, he asked Thibault, "Who are you?" Thibault replied, "The one who will teach you not to fall off the boat." They never returned to the subject. Several more years passed. The Duke died on the road before reaching the southern gate. He was brought to the capital at night. The new clerk, who wrote worse than the first, recorded everything as required. Cold people stood at the funeral, many of them expecting a different outcome to his life. Thibault learned about this from the same groom. The groom arrived at the port and said, "He died." And that was all. Tybalt nodded and went to the water. He did not pray. He sat on the edge of the pier and sat there for a long time. Then he returned and went to work. Once, when he was already over 30, a boy with black eyes came to the port. He was holding a cleaver in his hand and speaking loudly. He looked like Thibaut at that age. "I was told you would teach me," he said. Tybalt looked at him and said, "Who told you that?" "The old stableman from the capital." Thibaut grunted. "I teach everyone who hears the first time. Can you hear?" "I can hear." Thibaut nodded. "Then listen. This is no place for long speeches. Here people do their work and keep quiet." The boy nodded and fell silent. Those who were in the square remembered Margarita. They spoke of her quietly and without unnecessary words. "She stood up straight," said the old men. "She covered her head with a scarf herself. She didn't ask for mercy." These phrases circulated like coins from hand to hand. Their authenticity was not questioned. They were as they should be. The notebook was never found. Some said it had been burned. Some said it had been hidden in a wall. And some said the clerk had managed to take it to a monastery in the north. No one can prove it. But it doesn't matter. The words she wrote did their job. They killed her and saved the child. They wounded a brother's heart and saved the city from destruction. They left an empty room in the north wing and a chain in a box. They left a man on the pier and his short answers. Last fall, when Thibaut's arm hurt from an old wound, he sat at the entrance to the barn and watched the new boys carry the nets. Paul became the leader, giving orders and swearing, but he shared the catch fairly. The same boy with black eyes, now a teenager, approached Thibaut. He sat down next to him and asked, "Did you have a mother?" Thibaut replied, "I did." The boy waited patiently and asked, "What was she like?" Thibaut said, "She stood up straight." The boy nodded. "I see." They sat in silence. The boy spoke again. "And your father?" Thibaut looked at the water where the boat was rocking. "The father who came and left," he said. The boy nodded and asked no more questions. During the night, Thibaut woke up with pain in his arm. He sat up, rubbed his shoulder, got up, and paced around the room. He opened an old trunk, took out the letters, and laid them on the table. He didn't read them. He just folded them neatly and put them back. On top, he placed a small ribbon that had once been used to tie hair. He didn't remember where he got it. Maybe from Agnes, maybe from his mother. He didn't bother to look for the answer. In the morning, he returned to his nets. He did what he knew how to do. He did not seek an encounter with the crown, did not think about the throne, did not make plans. He lived simple days and did simple things. He learned to speak so that he would be understood the first time. When asked how to live after tragedy, he said, "Get up, do what you can, be silent when words hurt." He learned this from her, the one who was silent for 15 years, and then said one sentence that changed everyone. That's how it turned out. The story ended where it began, in the hall where other people's words are read. Only now there was no one left who wanted to read it aloud. People learned to keep the truth quiet, like a knife in its sheath. They kept it not to show it, but to remember where it was, if needed. And in the port lived a man named Thibaut, who cut ropes quickly and evenly and knew how to hold his gaze. He did not call himself the king's son or the king's brother. He was a man saved by someone else's death. He lived a life without titles and died one night in his bed. without crying out or asking for witnesses. On his table lay a box with an empty bottom. The chain had long since disappeared. It may have been worn by the man who signed decrees when no one wanted to read them anymore. But that no longer mattered. What was important was something else. One woman remained silent for 15 years and then told the truth. And in doing so, she did more than any sword could have done, and caused more pain than any sentence could have inflicted. Her name was not written on coats of arms, but it remained where people speak briefly and honestly. When someone in the port asked, "Who are you?" Thibault replied, "I am the one who is alive." And that was enough.